Anand Bhan, and I work with the Sangat Bhopal team. Thank you so much for joining in our monthly research seminar series. This from October onwards, the Bhopal team will be handling the monthly research seminar series for the next 6 months, and we are very excited to bring to you the first of the webinars that we will be organizing for the month of October. Just flagging that the topic for today's discussion is something that the Bhopal team also has a lot of interest in. As part of one of our flagship projects, Essence, we've been developing a course which focuses on capacity building in this space around service users engagement in mental health research, advocacy, and policy making. And our speaker, Mona, has been quite involved as one of the co-leads for the course. Just to also mention that this session is being recorded, and we plan to also upload it on our Sangat social media channels, Facebook and YouTube, etc. Just to, again, the speaker is comfortable with that, but if any of you would like to also keep that in mind while you're asking your questions. The session is going to be moderated, but feel free to also ask questions in the chat window at the end of the speaker's remarks. You will also have a chance to also ask questions directly to the speaker. You can unmute yourself and do that. So the plan is for the speaker to speak for around 30-45 minutes and then have the rest of the time available for discussion. All right, so coming to the speaker and the topic, as I said, the topic is service users engagement in mental health research. Many of us have a lot of interest in this area. As you all know, Sangha does a lot of work in the mental health space. We do a lot of research in the mental health space. But one of the areas where I think we certainly need to do more is how do we engage service users and caregivers in our research, and not just doing research on them, but actually getting them actively to participate in the research process. And I'm sure today's discussions will be very instrumental and helpful in thinking through how that could happen. We are very thankful for Mona to agreeing to speak for today's session. Mona is a mental health professional based in India. She has around 18 years of experience in the mental health and disability sector. Mona has trained at the Beck's Institute of Cognitive Behavior Therapy and has an MPH degree from the Johns Hopkins University of Public Health. Mona has also worked with Sangat in the past, with PHFI and with many other organizations as a consultant, and currently is also working with us in the Essence project in developing the service users involvement in mental health e-course for Essence. Actually, we are just about started the first version of that course this month. We launched it on World Mental Health Day, and we are very excited to see quite a bit of interest in the service users and caregivers community in the course. So thank you so much, Mona, for joining and for agreeing to speak to us. And over to you. I request Babita to kindly stop sharing so that Mona can share her slides.
Thank you so much, Anand, for the introduction. So let's get started. Okay, Babita, I'm getting the waiting room messages.
Yeah, Mona, you can start now.
Yeah.
You can go ahead, and someone from our team will manage the waiting room.
Cover my screen, so yeah. Okay, so let's start with why I'm talking on this topic. So one, because of my personal experience, I have lived experience of bipolar disorder, and I'm also caring for my family members who have mental health conditions. Actually, multiple members have mental health condition in my family. So since childhood, I've been engaged either in experiencing first-hand experiencing of mental health conditions. Second, I've also been engaged over the past 4 years, since 2016. I've been actively engaged in research that involves service users. Now I'm using the term service user here because everybody is comfortable using it. So one of the study that I was engaged in is called Include study. This was done in coordination with WHO, in which we try to understand whether the ICD-11 diagnostic system, does it capture the lived experience of mental health conditions or not. We wanted to develop. So the idea was to have a, like we have a practitioner's version of ICT, we have a research version of ICT. We also wanted to have a public health version or a version for community, for people who are living with mental health conditions, for their families. The idea was to develop a version such as this. So this study we did was a precursor to this, to the development of this, to this ICD-11 manual for service users. We concluded this study last year, and this study was published in Lancet in July. Another study that I've been engaged in, try to understand that, how service users and families in India, mostly in rural suburbs of Delhi and neighboring states, how do they use technology to access mental health care, to know about mental health care or to seek help for mental health care. And this study we did with researchers from Brown University and Microsoft. And we wanted to inform the different online resources that, what do service users, what has been their experience of using internet resources when it comes to seeking help for their mental health conditions. Another, of course, I've been engaged in different capacity building programs, like Anand said, Essence, the service user capacity building program of Essence that we just launched. I'm also working on Mission Shakti program of UP government. I'm working as a consultant. We started here, we are working with, we work on emotional and physical health of young girls. So what I'm doing is that I train about 100 girls in a particular area, and train them in mental health care, and then they lead the mental health care program in their jurisdictions. I also work with Red Cross, and I've been working with Red Cross for 4 years, and recently my work has been mostly, I train people who are directly impacted by humanitarian context, by a humanitarian crisis. So, recently I was working with migrant workers in Delhi. And, implementation, of course, I have planned and implemented various assertive community treatment program models. And currently, I'm also running various community mental health programs of Manurati Foundation, where, where the program, most of these programs have been designed and implemented by people who have lived experience or their family members. So this is my background. I mean, I talked about these, my research projects and programs that I've developed just because I'm going to use a lot of examples from my experiences. So these form the background of the presentation today. Now, what do you mean by the term service user? Like I said, different people use different terms. Service user is mostly used, understood. So I'm also using that term. But what are the other words that I used? Expert by experience. The Include study that I did in the last few years, we used the term expert by experience. One problem with using the term service user is also it means somebody who's using the service. Now, a lot of people with mental health conditions are not using services either. They don't have access, they can't afford, or they don't want to use the services. So another term that I prefer to use is expert by experience. Another is also person with lived experience. So somebody who's living with a mental health condition. I like this term person with lived experience because of its focus on experience. It doesn't say person with, say, schizophrenia. I personally don't use the term person with schizophrenia or depression or anxiety. Because, when we use these terms, what comes to my mind are the symptoms. But I have seen that, the actual experience is often not captured by these diagnostic categories. So I prefer to use the term person with lived experience. consumer or user used in certain areas, and caregivers or family members. So a lot of places you would see that family members are also a part of the term, the umbrella term of service users. You can use it as part of service user, you can do it separately, but mostly when we work with service users, then we do engage family members or caregivers. Now, which term you use is entirely up to you. Any term that you try to use, there would be arguments in favor or against it. But based on the work that you are doing, you decide, and the kind of population that you are going to work with, you should decide which of these terms you feel most favorable or connected with. Now, why service user engagement is important? First of all, if somebody asks me why it is important, based on my experience, I can say, if I have to explain in one line, I would say to better understand the experiences associated with mental health conditions. I'll just draw upon my experience of Include Study, because Include Study is something that I feel most connected to, where I learned about service user engagement. So we designed this study. So this study is a multi-site study. We did this study at University of Columbia, NHS in UK, and in Delhi. Now in India, we formed, this was a qualitative study. We ran focus group discussions with people for 5 diagnostic categories. Now, I remember, and for this study, we started engaging with service users at a very early stage, at the stage of idea, when we were thinking of doing this study. When we were planning that, we need to have a system that talks about, what it is like to live with a mental health condition. You have depression. So if I ask, what are the symptoms of depression? You would say, feeling low, feeling hopeless, feeling helpless. But what is the actual, these are symptoms. This is what you see. These are the observed symptoms. But mental health conditions are more experiences than not just symptoms. What you see in surface is just a part of it. Unless you associate or engage with service users, you would not understand the experiences. For example, depression is also about, wanting to do something, but not able to do it. Not because you don't want to do it, not because you don't have capacity. You know you can do it, you have the capacity, you have the time, and you want to do it, there's willingness. But there's something that holds you back, and you don't know what. You struggle with that, thought, or with that emotion in your mind that's going on in your mind, and you're not able to fight with that, and you feel guilty for not completing the work that you can do, that you have to do, that you have the capacity to do. You start to feel guilty. So this is what depression feels like. It's not just low mood or hopeless. There's also this, the helplessness you feel inside. So, to better understand. So when we were doing the Include study, I remember this person with bipolar disorder. He was engaged with us from the time when we were applying for ethics permission at AIIMS. So I remember this particular, so the process of Include study was that we simplified the diagnostic, the symptoms and signs of each disorder, and we translated it and we gave it to people who were a part of our advisory group. All of them were service users or family members. And we asked them to look at it and see whether they can understand, it makes sense, the objective or not. And I remember this person with bipolar disorder is saying that, do you think bipolar disorder is only mania and depression? It is not. Actually, the way bipolar disorder gets understood, even most of us, the way we understand, is that depression hai, mania hai. But bipolar disorder is something in between. Actually, most of the person who is living with bipolar disorder is somewhere in between. You are not always having mania episode, you're not always in depression. So bipolar disorder is also trying to understand my identity. Who am I? Am I the person who plans a lot of things, wants to do a lot of things, has multiple goals, feels energetic and motivated to complete them? Or am I the person who starts something, never completes? Who am I? These are extremes, but I'm somewhere in between. So bipolar disorder, a lot of the time somebody who's living with bipolar disorder is struggling with these identity issues that doesn't get covered, because these are experiences. You would not understand these experiences unless you engage service users. We would just be working with observable symptoms. And I have a problem, somebody who's lived with mental health condition, who's cared for mental health conditions all my life. I have a problem with just focusing on what can be observed. And so I think, that is the reason we should engage service users and engage them early on to better understand the mental health condition. Right now, our understanding is just based on what we have read, the clinical diagnostic system, but there's more to it. Of course, we should also engage service users to inform research development. I have seen, when we, both the studies that we did in our community, we had service using, like I said, engaged from very early stages. So, we were, how I was recruiting people was that, I would go and put posters and inform different people that, we are doing this study, and if there's anybody just, mostly it was visual, mostly it was putting the posters in different places. So I remember this person who was a part of the advisory group and said that, that this way you would not get people because nobody reads. If you put these posters in hospitals or in clinics, people are unlikely to read because. So I said, what should I do? He said, talk to the psychiatrist, talk to the resident doctors, tell them that, engage them and tell them about the study. Tell them that, next 4 or 5 days, if you have people who meet this criteria, tell them about my study. So actually that worked. And when I used this strategy, I could have a better recruitment. My recruitment rate increased. There were more people coming to me. People were more engaged. People were more motivated to talk to me. So, similarly, then when you have a tool or you develop a tool or an instrument, do engage. We have seen, like, when we translate our tools, when we made a questionnaire for our qualitative study, we did engage service users, and they did suggest, what the language, especially the language, the terms that we should be using. I remember there was a term we were using, caregiver, and there were some family members, and they said, why are you using the term caregiver? It's very stigmatizing. Use the term family members. We are family members, and I could relate to it. I mean, when I care for my mother, I'm not a caregiver. I'm a family member. That's what you do for families. So that is. So you learn to change the terms. You learn to use the better terms that are less stigmatizing, that people can connect with, that are actually real terms that should be used. Development of relevant interventions. Of course, interventions that will work. So, engagement of service users, we mostly, especially, when I work with Mission Shakti program, that is where, I ask these young girls that, how do you think somebody who's experiencing or facing violence, how do you think, what would be the best way to approach that girl? What do you think will bring her out? What do you think will help her to report abuse or violence? And the mostly so far suggestions and what should be done has come from what interventions, how we should initiate the intervention. Before you initiate intervention. So all these lot of suggestions, especially in this program, have come from people that I work with. Wider dissemination, obviously, when you engage service users and family members, you are able to have more impactful dissemination. And so far, I'm sure we all know about role of service user in dissemination, because this is where they have been used so far, mostly, in dissemination activities. It also impacts the attitude, when you start with, like, when we were doing this Include study, and when AIMS was, we were trying to engage with AIMS, and the first question was, how can you engage service users in development of research proposal and then engage them at every level? Is it possible? So I remember this person who I was talking about, with bipolar disorder, and he said that, he's a CA, and he said, ask me, he said to this researcher that he came, so he was with me, and he said, ask me anything about, ask me anything about finances and bipolar disorder. I think I can answer you. So this was the answer he gave this was the ethics committee meeting where he gave this response. So it does, I think, and when we were working with, and when we were talking to doctors, to residents, to psychiatrists about engaging service users at different levels of include study, there was a change in attitude, especially when we were going back with results. When I was going back and saying, this is what the study showed, and I could see psychiatrists coming and saying, oh yeah, this is what we also experience. We have also seen that, these experiences are actually not captured or not talked about. But yeah, we have seen this, especially about, so there was a change in attitude. There was a change, so we also did a meeting with psychiatrists after the include study got over, where we, and with the health ministry, we went and we met and for dissemination of of these results. And there was from the psychiatrist community to doctors community, there was this acceptance of the results that our understanding of mental health disorders does not reflect the actual experience of mental health conditions. And empowerment of both service users, family members, and researchers. It's empowering in a way that as a researcher, so I was engaged in this study both in the capacity of a researcher and a service user coordinator. So as a researcher, I feel empowered to know that the tool or even the study guide or the FGD guide that I have created, it is relevant for the group because the development was done with the help of or with the engagement of service users. So I am more sure of its relevance than I would have been if it was being developed only by me or my research team. Now, what are some of the principles of engagement? Again, when we engage with service users, first of all, I've already said that, recognize the expertise of lived experience. Lived experience is extremely important. It tells you about, what the reality is, what the person is experiencing. I remember again, drawing upon my experience of working. I remember this, as I'm also trained in psychology in CBT. So in my practice, you're often told that, in India, often women, when they experience anxiety, they don't report anxiety symptoms, but they report physical symptoms. That is understanding I had. And that is understanding many of us have. But when I was talking to these women from rural suburbs of Delhi, and there was this anxiety disorder the signs and symptoms, and I gave it to them to read, and I said, what do you think about it? Do you, how well can you relate with what was written here? What all you have gone through? What you have experienced been? So I remember this 62-year-old woman who was taking treatment for anxiety. She said, it's not like I'm not experiencing anxiety. I do experience, but it's normalized. It's normalized to the extent that you don't think it's a problem. For example, she said that I have 5 children, and I know whenever I got anxious to the extent that I thought it became a disability. She said it had happened most of her life, but always her anxiety was normalized to say that, that is how women are supposed to be. They're supposed to be worrying for their family. You have 5 children, you should be worried. You have daughters, you should be worried. So anxiety, she said, it was normalized. It was only after her children were married or they went out and she was alone in the house with her husband, and the anxiety did not subside. That is when it started to come as a problem, but till then, it was normalized. She was brought to the doctor only when she started physical complaints. And rest of the group, so this was the group where there were 5 women and 2 males. And everybody said that, it's not like they don't experience anxiety or they don't want to come to seek help for anxiety. But anxiety is not seen as a problem. It's normalized. So anxiety symptoms are there. You see, only that help is not only when there are physical issues or physical concerns that come up and that interfere with their life. And this happens most frequently. So we did two groups there were two groups we did with include study on anxiety disorders. And in both the groups, this came up by women that, they do experience anxiety. They experience the same symptoms of anxiety. It's just they don't know that they should be reported. Second, of course, another thing that I would like to come to is when you're engaging service users, start with building relationship. Start with engaging service users in the area that you're working with. So start now, even if you don't have any project or proposal coming up where you have to engage service users, but start building relationship. Whenever both the studies and that I have done, fortunately, I got enough time to build a relationship because studies started late. I was not prepared. I mean, it was not something I did intentionally for include study. It just happened that the permission to start the study came late. So there was a gap of a few months before we conceptualized the study and before we could start writing. So that at that time we used that time to, and we have already started talking to community of service users in Delhi, and we used that time to keep them engaged so they don't drop out. And we kept engaging with them. We kept doing different activities that were not related to the project, but just to keep them engaged and to form and to build a relationship with them. So it's very important before you engage with service users, build relationship. I also see what happens in India. I've also worked on different mental health projects before I started working only. So currently I'm working only on service user led or projects that involve service user. But before this, when I worked on different international global projects, I saw that so there was a mandate to engage service users. So you just go, and whoever is more known in your community, or who has been working, or who you already have a working relationship with, you just invite them to join. But that, I think that really creates inequality within the field. So anyways there's inequality, but when you do that, when we select people who are already known or who are already active, because or who are accessible, when we approach those people again and again and again, you would see the same people on different projects. There's a risk of creating inequality. You're missing out on a large proportion of people. Not that they're not approachable, they are approachable. I've been able to approach, like I said, women living in rural areas of Delhi, Haryana, UP. They are approachable. It's just it needs time, it needs relationship, it needs training, it needs investment. And mostly researchers don't have time or, a resources to do it. So you just, start working with service users that you already, they who already have skills, who know how to engage in research, who know dissemination, who know how to write. And that creates inequality, and we already have inequality coming up. I mean, I can already see inequality in our field. If you talk to service users, other service users, in the last 4 years, it's difficult to find two service organizations working together because they're limited resources. Everybody is vying for the same, the small sector of resources. So, that has created, that's created a gap. So try to build relationship with, don't just go with people that you already know are active or are known, but also form new linkages, especially in the community that you're going to work with, or the community or the area that you're already working with. So, offer equal opportunity. So if I would not go and handpick people and say, okay, would you like to join proposal writing? It has happened with me where people, last 2 years, at least 14 times it has happened when people have come to me, especially, a lot of now NIHR and other funding agencies have mandated in certain proposal that, it is mandated service user engagement in proposal writing. So at least 14 times it has happened where people have come to me and said, be engaged in proposal writing and you don't have to write actually. We just want to give your name. And I said, no, I would not do it. And then they asked me, do you know somebody who would be willing to do it? And I said, why? Go and form relationship, train people, engage them in writing, understand what their skills are, and see if they can contribute. But most people don't want to do it. And that's how it's been. And so far of the 14, only twice, it has happened when people have come to me to be engaged in proposal writing because they understand my skills. Rest 12 times it has just been, just we want your name. We just want your reference. We just want to show that your service user is engaged. So anyways, so offer equal opportunity. So if you're going to work, if you're working with depression, then the area that you're going to be basing your research in, offer, so disseminate that, you're writing this project and you're going to, you would need people in this capacity, disseminate this information, give opportunity to people to apply for it. We did this for both the include and the technology study. And of course, because we had a focus place where we wanted to conduct this study, but, still try to offer equal opportunity as much you can. Capacity building is very important. Capacity building of both the team, your own capacity building when you're working with service users, as well as training of service users. You don't expect, again, this capacity building component has been ignored because, mostly a researcher is a researcher. Even I have done that before I started working in this area. Even I would have done that. If I needed engagement of a service user, I would go to a service user who I don't need to train, who already knows whatever, I already know about their capacity and let me engage. So I would not probably, think about capacity building because that's investment of time and resources. But then that again, happens. Then the same group of people keep coming in different projects, same committees, same set of people in different committees. You would keep seeing that. I see that all the time. So, do invest when you're starting with engagement of service users. Remember these principles that, they are an expert. You have to build relationship. You have to try to offer equal opportunity to all people. People in the area. Try to, not possible to everyone, but as much you can. And training, remember you have to train. And, don't go for already trained or experienced people. Inclusive environment. This is important because I don't want when I work, even if as a service user, I'm working a project, I don't want to be treated differently. If my mental health of a service user, so have some inclusive policy, for example, the policy that I have for service users, try to have the common policy for the entirety. Mostly even mental health projects, mental health researchers, they have policy. I have worked in public health projects where I did not see mental health friendly policies. There was no mental health policy actually. So somebody who is experiencing depression, suppose there's a relapse and they need to, and you have, okay, fine, if a service user is engaged and, they would need some time off to take care of their mental health. But similar condition can also come with other members in the team, right? So have inclusive, keep it inclusive, not only for, you should not have these policies only for services. And again, that is something that really very discriminatory. I've seen it happening a lot of times where especially if I have gone with the identity of a service user, the way I am treated or benefits that I am given would be very different from if I go there as a researcher. And that hurts, because of this, there was a time, it took me a long time to come forward as a service user who's a researcher, or researcher is also a service user. It took me a long time because of this particular reason, because I did not find that, the policies or the environment was inclusive. So clarity about, so this is about, I hope this is clear, this point is clear about importance of creating inclusive environment for mental health care of the entire team. Clarity about roles and responsibilities. When you're working with service users, it's very important that you tell them what their role would be. So when you are engaging them, like I said, start engaging them at a very early stage. Even before you start the project, start engaging. Actually, start engaging from now onwards. I mean, start identifying people who can be engaged in, who are interested in being engaged in research, understand their capacities, understand their training needs. And when you engage them, tell them what their roles are, what the expectation from them are. So if there's an expectation that you have to work 3 hours a week, tell them. When I work in there, and I remember when I started engaging for Include study, there was a question that often came was, would you be calling me, what time do you start? And I said 9 o'clock. Okay. Next question was that, am I expected to come at 9 o'clock? So, all this should be very clear that, what am I supposed to do? So there will be a lot of questions. So be ready with the answers. Be ready where you want the service users' roles to be and what their responsibilities would be. You have to be very clear. Another is compensate. A lot of times I've seen you engage service users and want to compensate. And, again, I see it almost in every work that I do. Where it's like, they are living with mental health conditions. So when you're engaging them, they're doing something that they should be doing because this helps their own agenda, but actually it's helping your agenda. So do compensate. Even if you can't compensate financially, compensate in some or the other way. So in my organization, we do compensate in form of services. It's not always easy to compensate through funds. Then we compensate through different services, but we do compensate. Don't take the services of service user for free. Again, it has happened, when I'm engaging service users and I'm told, they should be doing it for free because they are getting trained. They are not professionals. They're getting trained to do it. So we are providing them training. So we would not be paying them. So I was like, but you don't engage them because you think you are training them. It should be other way around. You are engaging them because of their expertise, because you see them as experts by experience, because you need to engage, you need their experience, not because you want to offer them some training. So it should be other way around. So, like the first point, like I said, recognize the expertise of lived experience. So they're experts in their own way. Like you would compensate an expert, you compensate them. So they may not have technical knowledge, but you do provide some compensation for the experience they are bringing in. Keep process participation relevant. Again, in the projects that I've done in the past, I've seen, service users are engaged. Like for past couple of years, engagement of service users in dissemination has been mandated in certain global mental health projects. So what happens is that you engage service users in advisory committee that meets once a year, and that's it. And but is that enough? Is that all the service user who is an expert by experience has to offer? Go beyond that. And I think I've already talked enough about the importance of engaging them at different levels of research, starting from development. So, and that also creates an environment where service users, and I have seen that, when they also get used to this role of just being on different projects in advisory committee, meeting only once a year, or, meeting just a couple of times in a year, and that's all they see their role as. But I think that role needs to be much bigger. It can be wider. It can be much more impactful. Supportive environment. I think we already talked about it. To offer and understand what what their needs are. So some service user would have specific needs. Like I work with this person that I'm working with. she has this habit of, not habit, sorry, should not use this term, but she always, she has difficulty in time management. So I know it. And now I've seen she teaches yoga to our members. So I have seen that when I know she will not be able to join in time, and this is something that everybody in the group has gotten used to it now. So it's not like people, and interestingly, so if this session is at 5:30, everybody knows she will come at 5:35. Even then, all members are there at 5:30. So, we did not have to communicate it verbally to be sensitive or to be accommodating to each other, but just people started to accommodate themselves, so they don't come late, they come before, and they have for 5 minutes they engage with each other, and they know she'll come by 5:35. So earlier she used to feel very apologetic for doing it, but now she doesn't, and she's doing her work well, and that's all gets appreciated. So provide a supportive environment where you might have to make some changes according to the needs or skill set of a person. Follow values and working style of service users. Understand what their needs are, how they want to work, and see if you would have to make some accommodations. Be accessible. Be there to answer any questions or to talk about specific issues. So now research activities. So different research activities where we have engaged service users is already I talked about development of research ideas. The technology study was entirely an idea of a person who is living with a mental health condition, and he is a researcher, and this was completely his idea of trying to understand how technology, how people with mental health conditions are using technology, and what is been their experience of using technology. So you can, but again, before you develop, before you engage people, before that you should know who to engage, and before that you should have a relationship, a working relationship with people where they understand you, you understand their needs. So research ideas, you can refine, you can go to people that you already identified, you can go to them and say, hey, this is what I am planning to do. What are your inputs? So start engaging people at this level. Of course, proposal development, you can, not the entire proposal, but you can see, what the skill set of a person is, and accordingly engage them actively in proposal development. Doesn't have to be only writing, but even brainstorming on the aims, objectives, the population, that the target group that you're going to be working with, what instruments you would be using. Research management, I already talked about that recruitment is one place where I've seen engagement, engaging service users very helpful. You get insights into how you can increase your recruitment. Intervention development again would be useful to currently again our interventions are very much based on observable symptoms of mental health conditions. So engaging people in mental health who have lived experience of a condition would be useful to develop interventions that are more relevant, that are more doable, and which can be sustained. I've also seen that if you're engaging people, then interventions that are more sustainable, that would help in the long term. Research activities or tasks, you can again so what we did for Include study was that after we had analyzed the results, we went back to to all the members who participated in FGDs or who were part of our advisory group, of course. We went back to them and we said, these are the themes that we have identified. What do you think about it? So, you can engage them in results and ask their inputs about it. And of course, dissemination of the results we already talked about. Now, what are the challenges, what are the challenges that come in engagement of service users? First is tokenistic approach. I'm engaging because I have to. And we do it. I think we all have done it. I have experienced it. I have seen it happening, and I have done it myself. So, I think we already spent time working on this. So this is the first challenge, is that you are engaging them either because it's a mandate to engage them, or because you want to, because it's important to show that you're engaging service users in dissemination of that aspect. But that then becomes, and there are a lot of service users also, a lot of people out there who are actually, I remember that when who probably not challenge this approach also. A lot of service users would actually not challenge it also, and they would probably go with the flow and just be okay with being engaged only in advisory capacity and coming for meetings only, or just being happy to just give a nod, thinking that this is all what is required. But I think this tokenistic approach is very disempowering. So this is a message both for researchers and service users. Do not follow the tokenistic approach. It disempowers them. Not invest. Second challenge is that from researchers' sides, that you don't invest time, efforts, and resources. So we already talked again that you keep talking, keep taking the same set of service users, active service users, the more visible people who are more vocal. You keep taking them in every committee, every program, because creating new force or meeting new people, training them is more research intense. They also, when I have seen when service users are used as in dissemination, all they do is they go and speak what the researcher has prepared, or trained them to speak. So here the service users merely become a mouthpiece. They are a voice, of course, but whose voice are they? Whose advocate are they? So service users should not be used merely as an advocate to disseminate your findings. So even if they are disseminating your findings, let them go through the findings. Let them give feedback. Let them understand that. For our include study, when we had a meeting with Mr. Nadda, who was health minister at that time. So the researchers of the team did not go. I went with a family member who was a part of this team. We both went, and where we talked about. Of course, the meeting was for other issues also, but this was one of the agenda item as well. So we talked about that. We talked about what I talked about, not as a researcher. I talked about as a service user perspective. That what I understood from the study results. So I talked about nothing that's written in the paper. It was my own experience. Similarly, the family member who went with me, he shared his own experience that about the current way of diagnosing and treatment of mental health conditions. So let people trust that they have their own experience. Let them relate their experience with your research findings. Let them interpret. You can support them and then let them see how they want to disseminate. Another challenge that I've seen is that, if I look at the service user community currently, they are very educated, middle class, people coming from affluent backgrounds who form the service user community right now. What about people living at the grassroots? They are not. I mean, you would not find them in any service user groups or in any of the advisory committees. But a lot of, and one of the reasons that when I started questioning, when I started 4 years back, when I started working in this area, and I started questioning why people from different socioeconomic strata or different education level are not included, and I was told, oh, they would not know what to speak. They would not know. They would not even, they all they care for is that, treatment, and they would not really care for this research work. But that I did not find to be true. So even in this include study, we did multiple FGDs. The first FGD I did, because of my lack of experience, was with people who were educated, urban or rural, but educated, and who who were vocal, who knew how to talk, who had already participated in research activities or community-based programs, who were already knew how it works, and I was comfortable. But then soon after that, I realized that this is not the only group. I mean, I was recruiting people from clinic, and I should be where mostly people from a rural background were coming. So I had to change my strategy and engage people who engage more people. And it was interesting to see that the experiences, the study findings were not different between so the study findings were similar. Actually, study findings were similar across the sites also. So before we started this study, there was this concern about would we get enough participants from India or not. And actually in India was the only place where we got maximum participants from India, and we could cover all the diagnostic categories. And we could do multiple FGDs. Most of our findings were common. Most people were saying the one thing that they find missing in mental health system is, that it doesn't reflect their experience. When you talk about schizophrenia and you're not talking about stigma, when you're diagnosed or then the conversation is incomplete, right? And that stigma, it also forms the basis for a lot of symptoms that a person is increasing. Unless you understand that connection, you're actually not understanding the illness well. So service users try to engage different service users, different grassroots level, especially focus on grassroots level. If you're working with family members, mostly they have a tendency to work with parents, work with siblings, work with spouses. Now I see spouses becoming very active. Work with children, with grandchildren. Now in our organization, we are seeing grandchildren, coming and taking interest in the care of their grandparents. So engaged, let the group be as heterogeneous as possible. And don't go by this notion that people who are probably not educated or living in poverty probably would not know what to say, would not have anything to say beyond their experience. They have, and even when they talk about the experiences, they are comparable with people who from different like in our groups, people who we did not find too much of difference between the experiences. So another challenge that so keep the service user representative, keep the group very representative. High dropout rate. A lot of people come and they say, how do you? So in my foundation currently we have more than 100 members who are engaged, and we have had very low dropout or attrition rate. Now, why do people drop out? A lot of times, service users keeping service users engaged for a long time is a problem. So we would look at a lot of queries that I get from researchers that how do you keep them engaged? A few years back, one of leading researcher here who runs support groups, who was running support groups in her organization, she came to me and she said, after 25 years, I still struggle to get 20 people together for my support group. So why? So this is a challenge. Why do people drop out? Why do people stop coming? So how do we overcome these challenges? I think we already said, recognize the expertise, define the mental health condition, term, solution from the perspective of service users. Even term that you use the term that people are comfortable with, that they don't feel stigmatizing. So don't use the term caregiver. I stopped using since I was given a feedback. Why caregiver? What do you mean by caregiver? I've taken it out of my vocabulary. Investment in people, like invest in your team, service users, form relationship, invest in them, invest time, invest, train them. And we already talked engagement across levels, groups, and reality. And develop different engagement strategies. So even if your project gets over, don't try to be like okay, fine, now the work is over. See how you can keep people engaged. So though include study completed last year, we are still a group, we still meet. Most of the people are still engaged in some of the other activity. They are engaged with each other, they are engaged with the team, but there is a support group that's continuing. And now we are not engaged, but people have still, that group still exists, and they are engaged, and keep them involved. Even if there's a gap between activities, see how you can keep them active. Now, another screen that I'm showing, this is a checklist I use since I work with a lot of times I work with vulnerable population. And not only service user, but any vulnerable population that you're working with, attrition, dropout rate is high. People lose interest. People get angry with you. Why do they get angry with you? It's not because of symptoms. It's not, of course, it may be because of the experiences, but what you can do as a researcher, I've used this model. This is not a published model. I'm a cognitive behavior therapist, so I like putting things in, conceptualizing the patterns and reading them on dimensions. So this is a model that I picked from psychiatrists that I have worked with very closely. So whenever you work with service users, this is a model that I use, that people should feel belong. They should feel in control. They should feel the dignity and purposefulness for their engagement. If they don't, they would start they would start dropping out. So what I do is that I use this as a dimension. So belonging, opposite is alienation. I see that, okay, I keep whatever work that I am doing or activity that I am doing. And sometimes even individually also, if possible, I try to see where people are on these dimensions. Because I think if people are feeling on the left-hand side, these terms that are used, if people feel high here, then they would stay with you. They would actually feel engaged with you. The include study that we concluded, and there's a next step to it. So people are expecting that there is a next step to it where we would be engaged. So they are still associated with us. So I don't go out and talk to them. They are the ones who keep coming. They are the ones who want to be engaged because they think that there's a purpose. There's a next purpose. There's a next level to this. They feel belong, since most of them were engaged in it from before the study started, so they feel belonging. When we published this paper, a lot of people, they were like, why did you not publish in Hindi? Why are you publishing in English? And can you get it translated? So we even got the paper translated so people could read it. So you don't do that. Mostly, of course, publications are in English, and we don't. And people that we're working with are not English speaking, so do that, do these activities, let them feel in control, let them decide. For example, the FGDs that we ran, we let people decide how we are going to recruitment. So specific activities, let people take control, let them decide, let them be decision makers. Dissemination, let them decide the message, let them write the message or frame the message within their experience. Dignity is very important, Again, how you facilitate dignity is by saying, you are here not because I want to train you, or but just because I will benefit from your experience because you are an expert. So considering service users as an experts would help you to and purposefulness. Of course, they should see that it's going to their engagement is going to be useful and add purpose to the work that you're doing. So there can be more dimensions. I work on these 4 dimensions. I'm sure there can be more, and see where your project or people are on these different dimensions. And this has helped me to control the attrition in the work that I do. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Mona. That was really, really very interesting. You took us through your own personal story into your own professional experience of working with service users, caregivers, researchers. I mean, all of those examples from working with AIMS and on those various projects were really, really, I think to the point. And, obviously that's a very compelling narrative around why I think service users and caregivers should be involved and not involved. I think you were rightly saying instrumentally, not as means to an end, but actually involving them more comprehensively and working with them, whether that requires capacity building, whether that requires working with them right at the project design stage and not later on as a post fact, right? So I think that was really nice to see. So I think what we will do for the next 24 minutes or so is open up for questions. Maybe I'll get started while others are coming up with questions. One of the things I wanted you to maybe speak a little bit more to was the gender dimension of this aspect. And do you have any thoughts? And in your own experience, what is the intersection of gender with these issues? And whether that be caregiving, whether that be service user involvement, have you seen any patterns there and any thoughts on that?
Yes, Anand, I have. So in India, I've seen that, when it comes to caregiving, it's mostly the women who come with this role of caregiving. And otherwise, there is, I still have to probably explore it more. About the gender, of course, it does, there is a gender dimension to this experience of mental health conditions, but whether that gender dimension, why is it? I think it's more because of the social conditioning. That's what I found in the studies that I have done. It's more because of, the role expectations from a woman that, if you are, especially for common mental health disorders, depression and anxiety, which are more common among women, but it's also normalized in women. So normalization, I would say that, normalization of symptoms, especially of common mental conditions, is more common among women than it is for men. So this study that we did, we found that mostly women that participated in our work living with mental health conditions, since this study was done in urban, rural community, were they were mostly above 40. So they were mostly older women and younger men. So men identify anxiety, depression early, and they were seeking help before women. And it's not like women were not recognizing the problems. When we started asking, like, in Include study, we also went back. When we identified this pattern that, women are normalizing their experience, not like they are not experiencing symptoms, they're normalizing and they're ignoring it. We went back to the participants and, we said, this is what we found. What do you think? And everybody was like, yeah, we do that. It's not like we are not experiencing. It's just we are not reporting. So whether there's a difference in experiences or not, right now I can't say. But yeah, definitely there is a difference in reporting, in seeking help. In response to the symptom, there's a difference in that, how symptoms are responded to. And like, this woman said that, that I am taken to a doctor only if the life of other family members is impacted. So as long as I'm anxious and depressed and I'm doing my work, nobody would bother to show me to a doctor. And this finding we took back to our other 20 people, the other 20 women, and they said, yeah, this is how it is.
Sure. Thank you, Mona. Maybe it might be useful for those of our participants who might not know about the Essence Service Users course, which you've been involved in co-leading and creating. Maybe you can speak to that course a little bit, how it was developed and what are the main areas that you are focusing on, the modules, and what you hope will happen through the course.
So this service user course that we developed is for people living with different mental health conditions. Okay, so while I'm talking about service user course, can I also share an experience there, which is related to this course? But I mean, most of us may just see it on phenomena, we may see it or not. It's also, when we started advertising for this course, we got about 150 applications. And we were screening, we could take only 20 people. We had advertised for people living with mental health conditions, family members, So we did not use the term family members, we were using the term caregiver and people who were using some mental health services. So we, about out of 150, I think about 138 applications were by people who were not mental health service users. So we had to call each person because 150 was a lot of number. We did not know how to screen. And I realized that a lot of people, especially the young people, they were saying that they have mental health condition, but actually what they were experiencing is mental health distress. So since the pandemic has started, I also see a change in the way. So there's an increase in the reporting of mental health conditions. But mostly when you start talking to these people, these are not illnesses. They are not experiencing illness. They're experiencing distress. So there is what a professional would call psychologization of symptoms. Where you don't have symptoms, there is psychological distress. But a lot of, I was doing this talk last week in Muzaffarnagar, where young girls, they said we are depressed, and I said, how do you know they're depressed? They said we took this online test, and or we just read up the symptoms and it shows there's anxiety or depression or whatever symptoms. So there's high level of distress, and people have started, because of increased awareness, people have started diagnosing themselves or coming up with issues with observable distress. And coming to a psychiatric, and my colleagues who work in psychiatric department, they said, they're young people, the complaints of psychiatric issues have come up, which are actually more representative of the distress than the symptoms. So this is something that happened with our course also. We got a lot of applications which were by people who thought they had mental health conditions, but when we talked to them, they were not mental health conditions, they were distress. They were the usual distress that we would experience, in day-to-day life. Anyway, so this service user course that we are developing is for people who have lived experience of a psychiatric disorder, and we are hoping that by doing this course, people would be able to learn how to communicate about their mental health condition, to create awareness, or to start or to educate others about mental health in their community. And second purpose is to help people to start thinking about mental health governance. You know that our Mental Health Care Act, there are positions according to Mental Health Care Act, different authorities have a mandate to have representative of service users and family members. So we also want to start people. So though most authorities, SMHA or mental health review boards haven't started recruiting, or they are not functional yet, but we want to start training people in policy, in legislation, in legal aspects of mental health care, so that they can apply for these committees. So that is what the purpose of this course is. It is divided into 4 parts. So first we start with talking about what service user engagement is, the historical antecedents, the current scenario in India. In the second one, we are talking about the treatment, what treatment facilities are there in India, and what is the gap, what Mental Health Care Act, how does it, or different legislation, how do they help to address this gap. Third is on community development, which is on how you can build your message sensitively and engage communities. Fourth is on governance, where we cover the mental health law and policy. And in the end of it, there's also fellowship. We will be offering fellowship. There are 20 people we expect to complete this course, and out of which we would be selecting people to take over the fellowship in the area that they choose of their interest.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mona. So there's a question in the comment box from Hari, and Hari is asking, why aren't there many more patient support groups in India? And can you tell us what steps can be followed to start a patient support group?
Why there aren't many patient support groups in India? Because the formation of patient support groups have to be facilitated. Where do you think people meet? right now, if you think of where do you think people would meet? And mostly people who have mental health conditions, due to stigma, a lot of them actually may not come out and say they have illness and they want to start a support groups. It has happened, like I already said, that educated, middle class, urban India or metropolitans, the support groups have started coming. But those groups are still at their few, and they are only in the major cities. It's still to perforate to the grassroots level. That is also because at that level, there is a need for facilitation. Like when I start doing a study, the first people that I recruit or who are easy to recruit are people who are aware, who already have identified, who are more aware, who are educated, who are vocal. But because of this, so what happens is that you just keep working with these people. And I realized that if I have to get more people to be engaged, people from outside this small group have to be engaged, I have to facilitate it. So people would not probably just start coming and forming groups. There needs to be facilitation. Probably service users who are more empowered, who are vocal, can go and facilitate formation of service users in the communities that are neglected or where there aren't any. So I think one is of course stigma, and second is also because there is the awareness is there. I would not use the term awareness because people are aware, but there's no facilitation. There is no opportunity to form these groups. And what steps can be followed to start? Sorry?
Go ahead, Mona.
Yeah, so, I think offering opportunity, what I found when I was working at AIIMS is also, so some of the psychiatrists and researchers who were working, they had started it. They started facilitating groups. So these were small groups that started running informally. So they are not recognized groups. They just, so in the OPD when people started meeting and they would form connection. So I know some groups that formed in OPDs actually, especially for major psychiatric disorders where people would meet and they form relationship and they started meeting. Second is that through research projects, researchers or other people who have facilitated formation of these groups. Third is of course people, like I already said, service users who already have experience of facilitating. They can start forming more groups or facilitating such groups in different areas. So, and now that with technology, and most people are using technology, of course, I think it's easier to form and reach out to different parts of the country. Now the physical limitations are not there. So yeah, I think it's just facilitation. We need to start facilitating.
Sure, agreed. दिनेश जी, आपका एक सवाल था मोना के लिए, आप अपने आप को अनम्यूट करके पूछना चाहेंगे?
जी सर।
हाँ जी, पूछिए।
मेरा ये कंसर्न था कि जो हमारा जो प्रिंसिपल है फॉर एंगेजमेंट के लिए, तो उसमें समाज में जैसे एक स्टिग्मा और सामाजिक बुराइयां हैं, तो उनको वो भी एक ऐसा सिद्धांत है या होना चाहिए। मेरा ये कंसर्न था कि मैडम से मैं ये पूछना चाहता था कि वो जो एंगेजमेंट के प्रिंसिपल है उसमें ये भी एक प्रिंसिपल होना चाहिए कि जो समाज में एक कलंक या सामाजिक बुराई है, तो उसको रोकने के लिए भी एक सर्विस यूजर एंगेजमेंट होना चाहिए, या मैं समझता हूँ कि होता है।
हाँ जी, बिल्कुल जी। बिल्कुल आप ठीक कह रहे हो कि अगर समाज में जो कलंक है, जो स्टिग्मा है, उसमें सर्विसेज का बहुत रोल है। हाँ, कि अगर मेरे को जैसे कि मेंटल हेल्थ कंडीशन है और अक्सर सोचा जाता है जो मेंटल हेल्थ कंडीशन है उनके साथ में सी 2 लेवल पे रोल है। एक तो मैं कि मेरे को मेंटल हेल्थ कंडीशन, मैं उसको छुपाऊं ना और मैं जाके लोगों को बताऊं कि मेरे को ये कंडीशन है, मैं सब छुपाऊं ना, मतलब स्पेशली दोज पीपल हु आर विलिंग टू टॉक, और जो बात कर सकते हैं वो बात करें। दूसरी जो स्टिग्मा को रिड्यूस हम कर सकते हैं कि हम सिर्फ सिम्टम्स के बारे में बात ना करें, हम एक्सपीरियंस के बारे में बात करें।
बिल्कुल।
मुझे ऐसा लगता है जब हम सिर्फ सिम्टम्स के बारे में बात करते हैं ना, तो उससे स्टिग्मा आता है। हम जब अवेयरनेस कैंपेन भी करते हैं, अगर आप देखो बड़ी बड़ी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस की भी स्टिग्मा कैंपेन्स जो है, वो अगर डिप्रेशन का भी ले लो, डिप्रेशन में क्या है, लो मूड है, ये है, मतलब एक्टिविटी करने को कम मन करेगा, इस तरह के बड़े ऑब्जर्वेबल सिम्टम्स है। मुझे लगता है कि जो इस तरह की जो अवेयरनेस कैंपेन्स है ना, उनसे भी स्टिग्मा आता है, क्योंकि इसमें तो आप एक तरह से जब आप कुछ ऐसा पढ़ते हो, जब मैं ऐसा पढ़ती हूँ, मतलब मेरे को डिप्रेशन में रह चुकी हूँ, जब मैं ऐसा कुछ ऐसा पढ़ती हूँ, तो मेरे मन में पहला ख्याल आता है कि मैं इसके साथ आइडेंटिफाई नहीं कर रही, या उस इंफॉर्मेशन को पढ़ के मैं समझ जाऊँ मुझे डिप्रेशन, ऐसा नहीं है। ये जो डिप्रेशन का एक्सपीरियंस है, इट इज वेरी डिफरेंट फ्रॉम जो कि ये अवेयरनेस जो कैंपेन स्ट्रेटेजीज जो आज हमारी हैं, जो हम लिखते हैं, जो लिखने में है, मतलब जो अवेयरनेस कैंपेन्स है, सेंसिटाइजेशन कैंपेन्स जो यूज करते हैं लैंग्वेज, वो बहुत डिफरेंट है, वो टर्म्स बहुत डिफरेंट है जो मैं एक्सपीरियंस करती हूँ। ठीक है, मुझे ऐसा कई बार लगता है कि जो हम अवेयरनेस करते हैं स्टिग्मा रिडक्शन के लिए, कि जो हम कैंपेन करते हैं, जो हम कुछ अगर बनाते हैं कम्युनिटी के लिए, तो वो एक्सपीरियंस के बेसिस पे होना चाहिए कि एक्चुअली डिप्रेशन जब आपको है तो आपको कैसा लगता है, एक पर्सन जिसको डिप्रेशन है उसको कैसा लगता है। तो स्टिग्मा तब ज्यादा रिड्यूस होगा जब मेरे जैसे लोग, बहुत सारे लोग जाके बताएंगे कि ऐसा लगता है डिप्रेशन में, नॉट कि डिप्रेशन में ठक 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 ये होता है, वो तो होता है, ठीक है, बट एक्चुअल एक्सपीरियंस क्या है, उससे हम ज्यादा अवेयरनेस क्रिएट कर पाएंगे। तो इसलिए मैं हमेशा एक्सपीरियंस के बारे में बात करती हूँ, और जो मेरे साथ लोग हैं दे आल्सो टॉक अबाउट मोर अबाउट कि कैसा लगता है इस बीमारी के साथ में वर्सेस कि क्या दिखता है। तो देयर इज अ डिफरेंस। तो आप ज्यादा क्या लगता है, कैसा एक्सपीरियंस होता है, उस पर ज्यादा बात करेंगे तो ज्यादा अवेयरनेस क्रिएट होगी, वर्सेस कि क्या 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 दिखता है, कैसा दिखता है, वो इंसान कैसा दिखता है जिसको डिप्रेशन है, उसके बारे में कम बात करें।
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mona. Can you also maybe speak to the role of language a little bit? The way, there is language in research, the way there is language in advocacy, the way the mental health narrative pans out, and does that one either exclude, further stigmatize, or also make service users, caregivers uncomfortable? And, how can that be addressed? Is that an issue you've heard service users talk about?
Yes, I include studies entirely about it, and this across the sites we found that in the US, in UK, in India, that people said the language that is being used makes them uncomfortable. It does not reflect what it is. It does not appropriately talk about the actual illness as the illness experience. So yeah, there is a problem with the language. There is definitely a problem with the language, and not only the diagnostic system. There's also a problem with the language that we use in our research dissemination programs. There also, even the instruments that we use, the different instruments, the community-based instruments we use, they are also based on the signs which are actually stigmatizing, which actually, for example, if you give me an instrument and say that in the last 2 weeks, have you felt low? And if suppose currently I'm going through a low phase, I would write yes. And it actually does not, because it talks about symptoms, it talks about certain behavioral patterns which may not really explain what it feels like, what that depression, what that low phase, it does not capture that. So yeah, the language that we use right now does not capture the experience. I'm sorry to say, but most dissemination programs so far that I have seen don't. They still rely on the diagnostic criteria. They just simplify. You just simplify. So what most researchers or advocates do is that they take these symptoms and they just simplify them. They simplify the language. They simplify the terms. But they talk about the same thing. None of them capture the actual lived experience. And unless you do that, you would not be able to create appropriate awareness, reduce stigma, or get people comfortable to come out and relate with those symptoms. Like, we have seen, I personally cannot relate to the bipolar disorder diagnostic criteria that's out there. or how bipolar disorder is seen in normal discourse or is understood by most people. I'm not comfortable because I know this is not how it is. It is how it looks probably, but this is not how it feels all the time. And same is with other mental health conditions also. But yeah, we need to start working on it. That is where the role of service users is important, Anand, because they can come forward and say, this is what needs to be added. This is what needs to be changed. Don't use these terms. Don't write feeling low. It's not feeling low actually. So this is something that should, that's why engagement of service users is important. But yeah, we have gotten used to it. I mean, all of us, I was used to it till a point where I would read about it and I would be okay with that. It's only over the time when I started working in the area, I started listening to narratives that I realized that, people, it's not that, the way we talk about mental health conditions needs to change.
Okay, there is a question around what is the Hindi word for service users and service user groups. So is there a Hindi word which is more used for those who might not be comfortable with the English version of the name? Have you come across any? Go ahead.
So Hindi, see, I don't use the word service user in my work. I use the word a person living with mental health or lived experience. So हिंदी में हम बोलते हैं वो लोग जिनको मानसिक परेशानियों का एक्सपीरियंस है, डायरेक्ट एक्सपीरियंस है या फर्स्ट हैंड एक्सपीरियंस है, या जो जिनके परिवार में किसी को मानसिक परेशानी है या जो लोग मानसिक परेशानी के साथ रह रहे हैं. This is the term that I use because this is the term that the groups that I work with, and I work with, like I said, I work with very grassroots level groups. This is the term that they are more comfortable with using instead of patient. या ये लोग नहीं पसंद करते हैं. तो मोस्टली आई यूज दिस टर्म. जो लोग मानसिक स्वास्थ्य, मानसिक परेशानियों के से जूझ रहे हैं या मानसिक परेशानियों के साथ रह रहे हैं या उनके परिवार में किसी को मानसिक परेशानी है, मैं ऐसे यूज करती हूँ.
Okay, so maybe the last question, can you speak a little bit around intersectionality and service user collectives or people living with mental illness? The fact that, there may various determinants for mental health. Poverty could be one, social exclusion could be another. So there are caste, class, discrimination on the basis of being LGBTQIA, etc. So within communities of people living with mental illness, how is this being addressed so that you are more inclusive? And these kinds of differentials, which are societal differentials, don't also impact the way collectives are formed. For example, it should not only be an upper caste collective of people living with mental illness. How do you make it inclusive? Or Savarna, for that matter?
Yes, so I think that's a very that's a good question, and that's what I've been working towards for the last 4 years. That we are perforating across levels. So how I do it is that I would deliberately go and I am a member of LGBTQ community in Delhi. And I do take that mental health condition is not it's not a class of people. So mental health condition is across classes, across groups, across conditions. So when I work with people, I don't work only with people with mental health conditions. I'm working with people living with vulnerabilities, different vulnerabilities. So like I said, there's already a group that we run for LGBTQ. I work with humanitarian context because, again, that is a different group. Disadvantages, I work in rural pockets of Delhi. So I work across situations, across different contexts, so that I can get people from, and our services that we offer are not labeled as mental health services. There are, we have services for healthcare. So, so the strategy that I have found useful in my work, I'll tell you, is that, I start working with, so I started working with feelings of loneliness or social isolation. So I realized that, then we get people from different, we were getting, because, these are the feelings that are common. So what is common is experience. So what does mental health condition does to you? It makes you feel like the dimensions that I showed. So I work on those dimensions. I work with people who are feeling like there's no purpose in their life. I work with people who are feeling isolated. I work with people who feel abused or who are being abused. I work with these people and I use different strategy to help to understand their mental health and to provide them mental health or to link them with mental health services. So that is what I do. So I don't go with the agenda of that, I have to work with a particular mental health disorder. I work, instead I work with these, the experiences of that I, already showed, that I mentioned. I work across them, and I work across groups, of course. So that helps me to reach out to people uh, with different vulnerabilities. Like, working with migrant population and working with women living in Nizamuddin area. So that helps us to and to approach different groups and different people.
Sure.
So one
Great.
thing that we are increasingly finding is, like when I started working with social isolation, a lot of senior citizens living in Delhi, especially after lockdown, they became our members. So most of our members in our group are people who, senior citizens. Most of them may not have a mental health condition, but there's a distress. So this is how we reach out. We reach out by talking about actual experiences and, getting people to get connected with us. And if there's a mental health problem, then we connect them with services.
Great. Thank you so much, Mona. I think we've run out of time, but this was very, very useful and I think very insightful as well. I'm sure all of the participants of the webinar would have learned a lot. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing your perspectives. Hopefully it'll all cause a lot of reflection internally among all of us who are involved in mental health research, and also think through how in the future we could incorporate some of your recommendations around how to work with people living with mental illness, and how to maybe make them a part of your team when you're developing some of these project proposals, and work with them collaboratively rather than just research on them. So thank you again for joining and for providing your perspectives. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you especially to Babita and Shivangi from the Sangat Bhopal team for helping coordinate this webinar. And as you all know, this is a monthly webinar series. We will be in touch with the date for the next webinar soon. So thank you. Please take care and have a wonderful remaining week. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Bye.